Ball canning recipes are unsafe. That is the claim that I'm hearing all across the internet. Today I want to talk about whether it's true, and if it is true, what you can do about it. I want to begin by discussing the two players, if you will, in this story. One is Ball, and the other is the extension offices in the United States. So Ball has been around since the 19th century, and they published their first canning book, recipe book, in the early 1900s with the Ball Blue Book, the very first one being published around, I think it was 1919 or 1920. And those recipe books have always been considered very safe, the top notch in recipes and safety for home canners. The Extension Office has also been around since the 19th century, and they really became involved in canning around the turn of the century. And this was in part because jars and canning lids, which were different at the time, were becoming widely available to people on farms or anyone who wanted to can at home. And they also became involved in canning because around that same time, the 1890s or the early 1900s, people started to get sick and die from home canned products. And that was because they were just canning anything. And there were no rules in place that said, hey, you can't water bath meat, for example. You need to pressure can it. Now, as I've said before, I have lots of old housekeeping books from the 1800s, and every single one of them that mentions canning says only can fruit. So they had an understanding, even if they didn't have the science to fully understand it the way we do, that high acid foods were safe to can at home using water bath canning, and that low acid foods were not safe to can because in the 19th century they didn't have pressure canners. They did, however, in the early 1900s have pressure canners. So anyway, the extension offices, which are funded by the government and were just designed to dispense information to the average citizen about things related to agriculture. Basically, they were designed to help farmers or anybody with like a small holding. And so they became involved in canning, and their goal always, that's the dog chasing. Their goal always was to provide the best, most scientific canning advice that was available, the safest canning advice that was available. Now today, there are some people who really dislike the idea that the government is telling them what to can and what not to can. I don't think the government is telling you what to can and what not to can. The Extension Office, yes, technically it is paid for by taxpayer dollars, but, they don't work for the USDA. They're not, they're working usually in universities, and these are people who are experts in food, safety, nutrition, that kind of thing, when it comes to the people who are talking about canning recipes. And they aren't out there saying, no, don't do that. They're just trying to say, hey, this is really safe. We know it because it's been well tested. We have the documentation to prove it. This other stuff, we don't know. And a lot of times things that are considered unsafe to can today, it's because it's in the we don't know category. Sometimes we know for sure because the science backs it up that it's not safe to can. For an example of that would be, say, like noodles. We know through science and testing that this can be very problematic because it creates more density in the jar and the food doesn't get heated all the way through, and then you can end up getting sick when you eat the food. But other things, for example, say, not processed, but let's say cured meats, like ham, the extension offices will say, we don't know if it's safe because it hasn't been tested, so we are just advising you not to do it. Okay, so that's kind of the backdrop of the two players here. So in August of 2020, the Iowa the Iowa State Extension Office put out a flyer, I guess you would call it, telling 4-H participants what was acceptable for entering into the county fairs. So county fairs, when it comes to canning, they've always said it's fine to use any ball recipe or any recipe off the National Center for Home Food Preservation website or any recipe off an extension website. But suddenly, their recommendation for the ball books, or their guideline that it was okay to use a recipe from a ball book, disappeared. They didn't say it was unsafe, they just didn't, it wasn't allowed in the rules. Then later, that same extension office removed all its information recommending ball books to people. So it's taken this long for the internet hubbub to kind of come around and become more widespread. And this has translated to people as saying, oh, the extension office is saying ball recipes aren't safe. That's not quite true. If you dig a little bit deeper, you can find the extension office is saying, it's not that we're saying they're unsafe, it's that we're saying we can't vouch that their recipes are safe. Therefore, we as an extension office trying to provide citizens with the most safe possible way to can't say any ball recipe book is good. Okay? So why are they suddenly saying we can't vouch for the ball recipes? Well, the number one reason that they have mentioned is that Ball, who in the past apparently has shared their testing data with the extension offices, is no longer doing that. Now, I can understand why Ball, who's put time and money into testing proprietary recipes for canning, might not want to share that information. But on the other hand, I also know that it's really always smart to have third-party unbiased testing, or at least eyes on that testing, to ensure that they aren't just trying to make a quick buck, that they are actually providing safe recipes. To give you an idea of extension office ideas about looking at testing data, they have in the past removed their own recipes and stopped recommending them because they could no longer find the testing data. So in the early part of the 20th century, that was when the extension offices were given money to test recipes. Currently, they are not, unfortunately. So in I believe it was the 80s, they went back and looked at all their old recipes, looked at the data, just wanted to make sure that science was still considered really solid. And they found a few instances where they couldn't find the testing data anymore. And sort of a really famous example of that is zucchini. So they used to have recipes for canning zucchini all by itself. And they could not find the testing data, so they withdrew that recipe. And they say, we no longer can recommend canning zucchini this way. Number one, because we can't find that testing data, and number two, because different sources give different processing times and we don't know what's correct. It is still safe to can zucchini pickles and zucchini relish, basically a pickle, right? But this kind of gives you an idea. They're not after Ball, they're just after trying to be as accurate as they possibly can when it comes to the recipes they recommend. They don't want a bunch of people getting sick. Another reason that they've mentioned is that, and this has been a complaint for a long time, that sometimes the ball books aren't very good about giving accurate measurements. And that usually comes in play, like, let's say with fruit. Let's say you've got apples, and they tell you to use 5 medium apples. Well, that can vary a lot. What is a medium apple anyway? That's very subjective. And Susie's measurement of 5 medium apples could be quite a bit different from my measurement of 5 medium apples. So they're not using, sometimes they don't use weights to give you a proper idea of exactly how much you should use in a recipe. And that can be problematic, again, because of density issues primarily. If you have too many apples in that jar, it won't heat through and you could get sick. And finally, they have also mentioned that some of the ball books have errors, and usually these are minor errors, and it's pretty easy to look at older recipes and figure out that something is wrong. The only errors I have personally seen have been like omissions, so they're easy to detect. But the primary reason that there has been this move towards not recommending ball recipes is the first one. They haven't shared their testing data. And if I just did sort of a quick internet search for various extension office websites, and I noticed that none of the ones I looked at were recommending any ball books. So even though the Iowa State Extension Office is kind of getting the publicity here, it seems to be fairly widespread. Another piece of information that's interesting out of this is that some people in the extension offices had said the blue books are not the problem. Well, the blue books tend to have older recipes where probably that data was shared with the extension offices. But in recent years, Ball has published 3 different canning books. One is my favorite. That is the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. They also published the all-new Ball Book of Canning and Preserving. And then there's one other called Back to Basics, which I don't happen to have. And so if the problem isn't in the Ball books, that means it's in one of these 3 books, or in more than one of these 3 books, maybe all the 3 books. I can say that, obviously I haven't done every recipe in this thick book, but I have not myself personally detected anything funky or weird in this canning book, and I use it all the time. Now, so how would I know if something was funky? Well, I might not, but one way is to compare it with a recipe on either an extension website or at the National Center for Home Food Preservation website. So let's say I want to can chicken. I look at the Ball recipe book, and then I would also look at the National Center for Home Food Preservation. Do the basics line up? Are they using the same ingredients? Is it the same processing time? That kind of thing. If they do, then of course it's pretty safe. It's very safe actually. But another way is to be familiar with the ingredients that aren't safe to can. I mentioned to you pasta, rice, flour products, dairy, none of those. There are no tested safe recipes for those. So if you came across a recipe in one of the Ball books, I'm not saying there is one, but if you did, you would go, oh, wait a minute, that's weird. I'm not going to trust that as safe. And in fact, somebody had to point out to me that in this book, which I've used once, even though I've had it since it came out, just the recipes, for whatever reason, didn't pop out at me. One of the recipes, there is something really weird. It's the Asian pomegranate barbecue and stir fry sauce. Okay, on page 1, is that 82 or 62? 82. And it says the very first ingredient is 3 cups of chicken stock. Okay, but in the processing, you see that it is water bathed. Well, stock or broth is low acid, which means it should be pressure canned. So this is definitely a very questionable recipe. And if I worked for an extension office, I would be going, whoa, what's going on here? Should we be recommending Ball recipes anymore? This is one example. I have absolutely no idea if there are others. But that would be enough, I think, for the extension office to take a step back and say, unless you're willing to show us your data on why that is safe to water bath, we can't recommend this to people. So that's the story. So what's a girl to do, right? What's a canner to do? Because there are guys out there canning also. Personally, I don't think that I would go out on a limb and say, oh, I'm no longer going to use Ball recipes. Okay. I've already told you how I approach any recipe anyway is generally to look at similar recipes from trusted sources. And because sometimes there are minor variations, like let's say in things that are perfectly safe to change, like seasonings. And I might say, I like the sound of this one better. But you can do that and just for example, with this, what's it called? And it's a sauce, the Asian barbecue and stir fry sauce. I might go and see if there are any recipes from the Extension Office or from the National Center for Home Food Preservation website that are comparable. And if there's not, I wouldn't can that. It's not worth it to me. Why would I want to risk getting sick? Or worse, making somebody else sick. So that's kind of my philosophy here. I feel like I can still totally trust this book and the Ball Blue books. I am definitely giving myself a question mark on this one. I will look at the recipes more carefully. And probably for any future Ball books that come out. And I guess that's what it comes down to, is just using some common sense, right? So I think, as with a lot of things on the internet, this has been kind of blown out of proportion and simplified down to the point where it isn't even an accurate understanding of what went on here. So to just sort of summarize, the extension offices are not saying Ball recipes aren't safe. They're just saying we're not recommending them anymore because we have questions about some of them and we don't have the data that shows us they're safe. And remember, they've done that with their own recipes as well. Their goal is just to provide consumers with the safest possible recipes out there. I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions at all, please leave a comment. And as always, it's really helpful if you like, if you share, if you comment. And please subscribe. I know I've been doing tons of canning videos lately. That's because it's canning season. Well, it's kind of winding down now, but I do talk about all kinds of other things as well. Be sure to check out my playlists. See you next time. Bye-bye.